Jerome Powell, okay?
That's the introduction.
Quite likely that most people who listen to me and know that I'm an economics reporter would expect that I would really never say the Fed's name much, the Fed chief's name much. Jerome Powell was on the Fed. He was not the head of the Fed. He was on the Fed. When Donald Trump came in, he did something you don't normally do. He took a Fed chair out in the middle of his term and made Jerome Powell, who was a governor on the Fed, made him into the chair. So he continually says this is Joe Biden who did it. It's not Joe Biden who did it. He made him the chair. But presidents historically do not like interest rates high, right? Doesn't matter who you are and what political party you're from. You would like to be the president who made interest rates go lower, makes people afford things, they buy more things, their home prices are lower. So he's been carrying on with Jerome Powell about lowering interest rates for a long time. Problem is, most things we suffer from are recessions. In fact, we're all pretty good at recessions. We know how they work. The government can put money into the economy by lowering interest rates, causes people to spend, causes businesses to build plants, and you get to the other side. And actually, generally speaking, you're okay on the other side. You create more jobs and new things happen. Inflation is way more complicated. It's just a more complicated beast. We don't experience it all that much, and we've been in this inflationary cycle for a while right now, triggered by COVID, and we're still there, and Donald Trump would like rates to come down. Most economists say that's not the way you do it. You have to be very careful, because if you bring rates down, you cause people to spend more, and then you cause more inflation, and inflationary cycles get out of control.
And isn't that when they start talking about things like stagflation, which
are
even worse TV words? Yeah.
Right. You have stagnant economy. You don't have wages going up, but you have prices going up. And so that's a very hard situation mathematically to get out of. So Jerome Powell is trying to sort of stay the course and say, let us lower interest rates when it's time to lower interest rates, not one day before. This has caused some massive fight between these two guys, and Donald Trump's been trying to kick Jerome Powell out of the job for a long time. Now, he's out in May anyway. His term ends, so Donald Trump should just cool it on this.
Correct.
But he's definitely said that if he doesn't leave, he's going to fire him, and that probably wouldn't be constitutional.
Well, he can also stay on the board, right?
Yes.
This is a guy who could choose to just go away.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you're investigating him. You're making him, if it's me, my level of petty is I'm going to stick around.
Mm-hmm. They're investigating him over something to do with the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. And you saw, there's this clip that is interesting. You don't need to know the details of it, but basically they've gone to the Federal Reserve building, something a president really never does, and he's telling reporters that Jerome Powell has overspent on a renovation. Let's just play the clip.
So we're taking a look, and it looks like it's about $3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
Our notes had it about 3.1 as well.
3.1,
3.2.
This came from us?
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added
our entire capital.
Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building,
Well,
including
no,
the
but
Martin building.
it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's
So,
not new.
So
Can I just say?
Yeah.
I have never related more to any public official than Jerome Powell shaking his head tentatively but firmly.
Yeah.
And also, it has been almost a year since that clip first happened.
Yes.
And I am still wondering why Tim Scott did not get a hard hat.
Yeah. Well, that too. I mean, they made the Fed chair wear one, but you don't generally get to be the Fed chair. It doesn't come out of a Cracker Jack box, right?
Correct.
So you are saying something about a building. You're saying it was $2.7 billion. Now it's $3.1 billion in front of a guy who is more than likely to know the figures. Because that's, a lot of people say, oh, I don't have a head for figures. You'll never hear that from the Fed chair. So this fight about lowering interest rates has become now a criminal pursuit of Jerome Powell, who is being accused of having lied to Congress about this renovation. The whole thing's about a renovation. It's actually really about interest rates and not doing Trump's bidding, but it's now become about a renovation. And I have to say, this is a tough time because we've got inflation. We've got this war that we weren't supposed to be in Iran, which has caused the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which, Ali, you and I wouldn't have to know anything about the Strait of Hormuz. You would just have to look at a map, a
No,
Google
you
map,
would
and
probably
say,
have to know about the Strait of Hormuz. I, a political reporter,
but now everybody does. Because now you know it's a choke point that has caused our oil prices to go up. Now it becomes even trickier to cut in interest rates. And this fight still continues. Last I heard, Jeanine Pirro is still going after to Jerome Powell. I think she visited the Fed building herself again today.
And there's a few threads to this, right? There's something about this that feels so quintessentially Trump in that he is now making an American public that's even a little bit aware of the news cycle consider a man in the Fed chair who they never previously had to think about in their day-to-day lives.
Yep.
That is so quintessentially Trump, where he takes these obscure parts of government and either tries to bend them to his will or fire someone that he shouldn't or speak about something that really a president never should pay attention to.
Yep.
And then the American public broadly is like, wait a second, what is that about? And you know what? As much as it's crazy, I also appreciate the fact that it makes all of us more aware of the way that government works. And I think an informed public is a great thing. At the same time, when I think about the Jeanine Pirro investigation continuing, yes, there are the legal concerns about that, given the fact that there's no clear sign that Powell committed a crime. But then let me take it back to the place that I spend an inordinate amount of time, which is Capitol Hill, because it is both the place that these allegations first cropped up, because what the administration and its allies did is they took an obscure 2-minute part of Powell's testimony in front of the Senate Banking Committee, where he talked about these renovations. And then they tried to say that he lied about how much something cost, even though no member of the committee said that they heard anything that was a lie or untrue. And now it leaves both Tim Scott, who's the head of the banking committee, and now between the rock and a hard place of having to tell the president that the allegations are false, but then also not wanting to get crosswise with the president. And then it brings in Thom Tillis of North Carolina, senator who said he's not running for re-election and is basically, because we are on YouTube, I can say this, in his fuck around, find out era. And he is someone who the administration has pushed and prodded and threatened politically. And this is his moment to stand firm on the Fed. And even just in the last 30 minutes before you and I started this conversation here, Tillis said, I will continue to hold out on pushing forward with any nomination until you clear the Fed chair and stop investigating him. That's a huge potential buildup in Congress of nominations. And then the reason that he gave is he said, yeah, look, the Fed is an independent entity, and that is an important piece of this. But the other piece that he's worried about is that by taking a 2-minute snippet out of the Senate Banking Committee and saying, I'm going to prosecute this person for perjury, that it's going to take the teeth out of any congressional oversight going forward. And that is bad for members of both parties.
Yes.
And that's another tail to this that I don't think we've fully seen fleshed out.
Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see how this all, how it all falls away, because one of the few things that's interesting about investigations into people who haven't committed crimes, of which we're seeing a lot of these days, but particular interference with the Federal Reserve or the central bank of a country, this makes you think about Turkey. Makes you think about Hungary. It makes you think about India. These are what you call, a lot of people are calling them competitive autocracies, right? In theory, they have elections, but it becomes very hard for someone else to win an election, which is why the election in Hungary was such an important thing on Sunday, where they threw Orban out after he'd been in power for 20 of 29 years or something of that nature, longest serving NATO leader. And the government of Hungary, the people of Hungary didn't make some lurch to the left at all. Their politics is still pretty right-wing and anti-immigrant, but what they said they were sick of was the oligarchy, the control over media, these charges that people face, that journalists face, that public officials face, that are just meant to intimidate them. And they made a change. And there's a lesson in it for America, another topic that none of us really would have ever known about. Why should we be talking about Hungary? Yes. But I would say to people, there's some good stuff that's been written this week about Hungary to understand how America might learn from Hungary, to say you don't have to all become like one person. Like all these Republicans who are anti-Trump, everybody doesn't have to become a Democrat. Everybody doesn't have to become a Republican. You can be Republicans, Democrats, or independents, and just say that you would like honesty and fairness inside the system. Credit to Thom Tillis. He came around to this a little late, but he's there now.
But it's also why it's harder for me now, someone who came up in the traditional model of campaigns are red versus blue, D versus R, and they are still. But like increasingly, it does seem like we are circling a moment where it's, are you pro-democracy or are you not? And if you look at the way that Hungary made this slide, it was not done through large movements. Instead, it was done through incremental changes within their constitutional rules and laws to expand the court, to bend media into its government will, to shore up Orban's ability to continue getting elected in elections that happened but weren't happening fairly.
That's right.
And I think that's why there's so many of these parallels. And frankly, the way that MAGA world has continued to come to Orban's aid, support him, endorse him. J.D. Vance went there. I mean, again,
Trump called into a rally. I mean, they were really invested in this. The far right in America has really used Hungary as a blueprint for what this could look like. So it's actually a very big deal that Orban lost. I want to take a question. Our fantastic producer Ari goes out and talks to people and gets their questions. I thought this one was really interesting from Rich about the draft. Now, I'll let everybody know you don't have to be alarmed about anything about the draft right now. But again, it's one of those things because we're in a few active situations right now that people are thinking about. I'll explain on the other side what Rich is talking about.
I guess I would love to know more about like the draft that's being pushed later in December. Like I know people are going to be like registered more, but it's going to be like a mandatory thing. Like I don't think that's going to be possible in this day and age, but I'd love to know more about it.
So I think it's, do we have an email question about the draft as well? Just asking, yeah, let's put it up there just so we can answer it as fully as we can. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ali V, but nothing is changing in terms of the structure of the draft. There's no active draft going on. There's nothing right now that no one's getting called up or anything like that. It sounds to me like in December, and this is the biggest change that we've seen to the draft mechanism, the selective service mechanism in a long time. It's going to, they're sort of automating the system that it's not, you're not going to actively register for the draft or fill out whatever forms you fill out. It's going to be automatically done through the process of something else that you're doing. They're going to be using Social Security records and DMV to register people for a draft.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think to the question that's on the screen of, do you think if they, I presume meaning Republicans, are still in control of Congress, will they reinstate the draft? I actually think that part of the reason we are having this conversation right now is because these incremental updates that actually were decided well before what happened in Iran were actually coming to fruition during this Iran war. That is why they're tied together. But I don't think, and I have not spoken to lawmakers who have an appetite to reinstate the draft. And also, I think the next inflection point potentially, and again, this would mean lawmakers saying it and then sticking to it in terms of their actions. And for Republicans, that has not come to fruition many times when it comes to bucking the Trump administration. But should this Iran war continue on, and should it escalate into something that includes ground troops, multiple Republicans who were initially skeptical of the war itself have said that they want to have a vote on that. And if there's at least 6 of them, then that becomes a different conversation in the Senate. And quite candidly, I can count to 6 who were skeptical enough to at least voice skepticism and then fall in line, feeling like the administration wasn't going to put boots on the ground. And
the average American does not want a draft.
No.
But there are a lot of voters I've heard from on social media mainly who say, maybe there should be a draft because it'll make everybody in Washington think 3 times before deciding that we're going to war. We don't have ground troops on the ground in Iran, although clearly there were some troops on the ground in Iran to conduct the rescue of the 2 airmen who were downed. So they have some capability of being in there. But every 2 days, we hear of more people being sent into the area. When we have, my last count was upward of 70,000 troops, generally speaking, in the Middle East. Some of them are on strike carrier groups. Some of them are on bases. We have a lot of bases in the Middle East. We have more than 10,000 in Qatar alone. So there are troops in harm's way. And sometimes Americans are in favor of military action that we take. Generally speaking, once you take it, it tends to diminish in support over time because they tend to get dragged out and they tend to not be very clear. The problem with the stuff in Iran is it wasn't popular on day one. And it's only getting less popular.
But I don't know if this, I wonder if you had this thought as well, because I remember The Hill was talking for weeks about the likelihood of an Iran strike happening. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. Ultimately, it happened. But I was surprised that it took until day 30 some odd for President Trump to come out and actually give an address to the American people. And that to me felt like an address that you could have given on day 2 and actually probably bought yourself a month or 2 in the polls to have a public that's already skeptical for good reason of protracted conflicts in the Middle East, at least have explained to them why you are doing this. And I am so struck by the ways that this administration really does expect knee-jerk loyalty and knee-jerk leeway on all of its decisions. And I think it does lend to the idea that we talk about a lot of the way that Trump is in a bubble. He's with people who do not have to say, or who do not really feel that they are empowered to say no or I disagree. And I think it's reflective in the strategy here, where he didn't feel he had to explain this to an American public that I actually think a good chunk of Americans probably would have been receptive to hearing.
I remember
saying, let me give you a chance.
I remember when Bill Clinton was in the Oval Office and had maps to explain a war in Yugoslavia, knowing full well that most people wouldn't have known where Bosnia was or Serbia was, and he wanted to explain it all. We got a question that Ari got outside from Riley about, I'm sorry, not from Riley, from Axel. I would love to hear the question from Axel about the war in Iran. That's what I like about taking questions. You get a good sense of what people know and don't know, what they want to know. Let's hear from Axel.
I hear there's a war going on in Iran. I want to know more, just what's going on day to day, the impacts of that, what I should know about.
So that's a beautiful question, because Axel is a regular person going about their life in New York who could or could not ignore the war in Iran and wants to know what they should know about it. So I would put this into 3 categories. Number 1, Axel's life is being affected by the war in Iran. Axel's that was done in Midtown Manhattan, so I take a good guess given Axel's apparent age. Axel's not a car owner, but might be. But it doesn't matter, because everything that Axel orders that gets delivered, that comes from a farm, that was grown on a farm, that gets shipped to a grocery store, or if Axel is of a certain type who gets things delivered to their house a lot, all that's become more expensive. If Axel travels, all the airlines now have increased baggage fees. They have now put on fuel surcharges. The U.S. Post Office put on a fuel surcharge. Everybody's adding extra money to your life because their life is more expensive, because the price of oil is up because of the war in Iran. Number 2, the price of the stock market has been volatile and all over the place. It's now back up again.
Do not check your 401k.
Right. This is Axel is young enough to not worry about the 401k. That's number 1. Just you don't do it now. Generally speaking, over a 10-year period, the markets go up. So unless you're within a few years of having to pull out your money for retirement, don't worry about your 401k. But number 3 is probably the most serious, and that is Axel is, I assume, a voter in a nation that has gone to war, that it will not even call a war, without the proper approvals of Congress, and Congress has not been responsible enforcing that matter. And that, to me, is the most serious matter, there's a reason it was written into the Constitution, that Congress will have the amendments, that Congress will have the right to approve these wars, because there's a sense that you can throw those bums out faster if you don't like what they're doing. But the administration is deliberately, Donald Trump has said this, not calling it a war, because if you needed to call it a war, you'd have to get approval from Congress. I remind people, Vietnam, one of the longest engagements we ever had, was never a war. It was a police action. The thing that they're doing, that Russia is doing in Ukraine, is not a war. You can go to jail if you call it a war. If a journalist calls it a war, they go to jail. It's called some special military action. Venezuela was also not called a war.
Law enforcement.
It was a law enforcement action, right. And now there's talk about Cuba. So it's just, if you're going to go to war, just be honest with me. If my country is going to war with my taxpayer dollars and endangering my life, just please be honest with me and tell me you're going to war. This is going to be hard. It's going to take a long time. And here's what we think the objectives are on the other side. I haven't heard any of that.
And the other piece of it, too, is when lawmakers have heard the administration's legal rationale, and you do need a legal underpinning to undertake these actions, whether you are striking those boats that we saw them striking
Yep.
in the Caribbean during the fall, or whether you are doing a more full-scale action, you need a legal underpinning. And the way that the administration is effectively defining war is boots on the ground, something that looks like what you would see in a movie about war. It's Saving Private Ryan, and that's the only way that they would need to actually get congressional approval. That is not fully agreed upon by legal experts, and certainly Democrats have a heavy disagreement with the fact that they think you needed to come through Congress. Heck, Senator Rand Paul, Republican, also thinks that you needed to come through Congress. And yet, this administration is using that idea as, we can call it by another name, in Venezuela, in Iran, and then I think Cuba is an important piece of it. And the reason that I think we should be forecasting ahead to Cuba is because when I look at this administration's foreign policy of Trump's second term, it actually sticks closely to someone I covered for a long time, both as a presidential candidate himself and on Capitol Hill, and that's Senator Marco Rubio, who is now Secretary of State. He is someone who was always, and this is big for the Florida delegation as well, Venezuela and Cuba are central issues there.
Yes.
For Rubio, because he is the son of Cuban refugees,
Yep.
but in Florida, massive Venezuelan population there. And it's why when you see them undertaking these actions in Venezuela and then looking over to Cuba, the oil embargo from Venezuelan oil has made the situation there even worse. You and I have questions about maybe whether there's some negotiating happening still behind the scenes. But this is why you can look at it and say, okay, if it's the Rubio playbook, these are the places that he has always focused on. And that's what the administration seems to be acting on, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. And Cuba, unlike Iran, which is a very heavily industrialized country with a massive military, a massive industrial base, and energy and control over the world's energy, Cuba has virtually none of those things. Cuba is dependent upon trucks, tankers of oil getting in. The Americans unusually let one tanker through. That'll give Cuba 3 to 4 weeks of oil, but all of its electricity runs off of oil. So garbage is piling up in Cuba. There's no electricity. They run electricity for a few hours a day. So there's no air conditioning. It's very hard to get internet. It's very hard to communicate. So my sense is something's happening in Cuba, and we should keep a close eye on it.